This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor. A republic, if we can teach it, fixing America's civic education crisis. I'm very pleased to welcome my colleague David Davenport of the Hoover Institution, writing with his colleague Jeffrey Sikkenga, a book about civics that doesn't much show up here in the 21st century. We've been through months and months and months of upset, turmoil, disorder on campuses, especially elite campuses. Where did that come from? What are those students and their graduate friends talking about? Why do they make statements about America that have no basis in fact? David, a very good evening to you. Congratulations to you and Jeffrey. We begin with quotes from the 18th century, our founders. Thomas Jefferson, in your book, said that good education, civics, is the result of habit and long training. And Tom Paine, troublemaker, said that civics contributes to the right of voting, to know how to vote. Now, who could vote and how they could vote has changed dramatically since the 18th century. But what has not changed is the need for civics. So let's start with a definition. What is it, David, in the schools? How is civics understood as integral to the success of the United States? Good evening to you.
John, always good to be with you. Civics, of course, is really an understanding of how and why our government was formed the way it was formed and why it works the way it works. And so just as we understand we have to prepare students for jobs and we give them all kinds of scientific and mathematic and technical training, we also have to prepare them to be citizens, and a few of them even to run the country. And so to give them a background in history, it includes history, it includes government, it includes leadership studies, it includes looking at biographies of America's great leaders. So we're trying to get at the what and the how and the why of how America works.
The statistics of various measures of our students these days, since 2020, show overwhelming lack of information. They just do not know simple, straightforward matters of dates and people, times, and philosophies. Overwhelming, especially among the youngest. Compared to the over 65 crowd, that would be my lot, David. Only
And
19, yes, David, I include you, younger people. Only 19% of the over 65 are ignorant of these matters, but an overwhelming amount of young people are ignorant. Is it because it hasn't been taught? Is it because it's been taught ineffectively? Is it because of something like the internet? What is there one thing to explain it, David?
Well, let me say I'll put a couple of statistics on the table. The latest NAEP, or Nations Report Card tests, which test eighth graders on civics and history, showed that only 24% were even proficient or better in civics and government, and a shocking 14% proficient in U.S. history. So the lack of knowledge and understanding that you described is absolutely verified by the figures. We argue in our book, and I think this is a little gentler argument than some would make. We argue that other priorities have really crowded the teaching of civics out of the classroom. And we've moved over the years toward much greater emphasis on math and reading skills, obviously vitally important. Today, we're making huge investments in STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. Hard to argue against that. The problem is that when we add these new areas of emphasis, we don't lengthen the school day or the school year. So they come at the expense of teaching something else. And the data shows that those something else that have been pushed out of the curriculum are humanities and social sciences, and especially civics. And so we're to the point now where there's very little civics taught at all in elementary or middle school. And then in high school, we're reduced generally to a one semester course, which is kind of too little too late. And so that's our view, that we've basically pushed civics out of the classroom, and students are suffering as a result, and our country is suffering as well.
Rhode Island. Rhode Island is a case in point of an extreme version of no civics. Rhode Island was sued, I believe, by students who said, you deprived us of knowledge when you didn't teach us about our own country, history, and
Yes.
how the government works. And Rhode Island argued that they children had no right to education. He said that with a straight face.
Yes, that's one of the sad chapters about civics in the country. Is you're exactly right. It was the high school students themselves who sued education officials in Rhode Island, saying, we don't know how to be citizens. We don't know about how to vote. We don't know about serving on juries because you don't teach civics. And they made it to a federal court, and the federal judge was very sympathetic. He said, the students have identified a serious problem. Unfortunately, I can't give them a constitutional remedy because there is no constitutional right to a civics education. But he said they certainly need one, and I think it's incumbent upon Rhode Island to provide it. Well, the good news is that though the students lost that particular battle, they made it great progress in the war, which is finally the legislature in Rhode Island, after all of these lawsuits were over, began requiring and teaching civics. So a great story, I think, of the students realizing what the adults apparently did not, and that is that civics is essential.
The last 40 years, we've had big programs from Washington, from our legislature, about education in America. My notes say 1983, Nation at Risk, and then No Child Left Behind somewhere in 2002. And Race to the Top, I believe that's 2015. And David's already mentioned STEM. The STEM pursuit today still dominates the school. And then something called the Common Core. Did any of these different versions of how to educate American children from the federal government, did any of them address the emergency in civics?
No, in fact, they are part of the problem. The emphasis in all of those areas, which has led to this testing regime that seems to dominate our schools, preparing for tests, taking tests. Um, these were kind of educational emergencies that the federal government thought we were experiencing. Our test scores were not comparing favorably to those of students in other industrialized nations. So we had to do more in terms of teaching reading and math skills. We concluded that we needed more science and technology education. And so we spend a great deal of money on STEM, almost nothing on civics. So these were all other priorities that the federal government thought needed to be added in an urgent way to our educational process. But again, there was no addition to time in the classroom to teach them. And so that time was taken away from civics and other humanities and social sciences.
And you've already mentioned how STEM dominates. I was struck by the fact that only 5% of the high school curriculum, I believe, it might include middle school, is devoted to civics. 5%.
Yes, the
Now,
federal government spends, 50 some dollars per student per year on STEM and 5 cents on civics. And I mean, that just puts it all in perspective. It seems to me it's just not a priority and hasn't been for probably 25, 30 plus years.
I want to make a detail here. When I say civics, I also include history. I
Yes.
think of them together because without history, you don't have the illustrations of the philosophy that you're supporting. And you can wander into troublesome areas, such as thinking socialism is viable or communism is not all that bad. The history matters a deal. We're going to turn now to how bad it's gotten here in the 21st century. It didn't begin well in the 20th, and now the book is A Republic If We Can Teach It, Fixing America's Civic Education Crisis, Jeffrey Sikkenga and David Davenport. I highly recommend this to administrators in high school and junior high school level. It'll be upsetting. You'll measure yourself against it. It's not at all a bad thing, however, to have this book to put on the table when somebody says, why should we teach more civics? We come now to some quotes that are especially unhappy making to me. Former Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, I believe he served Chicago and then he was Secretary of Education for the Obama administration, maybe as much as 8 years, I don't recall, said that he said we shouldn't teach your grandmother's civics. What did that mean, David? And I wanted to interpret it generously as possible.
Sure. I mean, there is a sense that the way we teach civics has been a problem. And like a lot of other things about America, where people argue the Constitution is antiquated and needs to be fixed. Um, and so there's a sense that the way we teach civics is antiquated. It's your grandmother's civics and memorizing dates and historic events. That's not what we need to be doing anymore. Um, Generously, I think it reflects the fact that the way we teach civics, to the extent we teach it at all, I mean, one of the problems is we don't teach enough, but to the extent we do teach it, we teach it in a way that's boring. We use textbooks that are boring at best and frankly biased at worst. We do too much memorizing of dates and events and so forth. And Jeff and I don't argue that that's a great form of civics. Um, but obviously, you do have to start with some what? You have to know some facts from our history. You have to know some about historic events and why the Constitution came to be, for example. And so to belittle the teaching of history and events, as Secretary Duncan unfortunately did, is really not helpful.
Ronald Reagan said, quite famously, David quotes him in the book with Jeffrey, all great change begins at the dinner table. Wonderful quote. Easy to agree with. Now, at the dinner table, I agree, but how did we come to Howard Zinn? Who is Howard Zinn? And what what explains this, David?
Well, Howard Zinn is certainly a bad guy in our book, and we're not the only ones to have identified the problem. Howard Zinn in the 1980s wrote a people's history of the United States. And I think probably even Zinn's view is that this would be a contrarian textbook, contrary to the kind of positive image of American history. And as he said, he wanted to write a history that was on behalf of the losers, the disadvantaged, the people who didn't fare well in history. And he wanted to point out their plight. Well, it's a pretty extreme story, as Zinn tells it. I mean, Christopher Columbus is not a discoverer, but he came to take advantage of Native Americans and to hoard gold. And the founders didn't institute checks and balances in the Constitution to protect the country. They did it to protect their own wealth as landowners and slave owners. And on he goes, right on through the present day, about how what American leaders did was kind of selfish and for their own benefit and to the disadvantage of many, many oppressed peoples in America. The interesting thing is that with liberal teachers who frankly graduated from college when you and I did, John, with a very liberal progressive view, they began teaching this book as the mainstream of American history, not an alternative to be considered. And so, unfortunately, now it's one of the most widely used textbooks in America. And as my late colleague Gordon Lloyd used to say, it's hard to love an ugly founding. And that's precisely what Zinn gives us an ugly discovery, an ugly founding, an ugly constitution. And it's no wonder that students don't love America because this is the kind of thing they're being taught.
So we've gone from no civics or not enough civics to a perverted version of America. And I deliberately so. What you're saying is he wanted the other story. Well, yes, there are many other stories. And the Zinn book is presenting to America's young people a story about America that has no basis in fact, David. It's an interpretation from the 20th century with a man who sits there with electricity and is paid an enormous amount of money for each book he sells. That's not American history.
No, but unfortunately, that has become the base for a lot of more modern movements. The 1619 Project, fostered by the New York Times, which says that America we shouldn't teach America beginning with the revolution and the founding. We should teach it with the coming of slaves to this country. And the economic story of slavery is really the story of the founding of America. It's not the story of revolutions and political rights and constitutions. And on and on we go. And so Zinn laid a foundation on which others have been building. And the story of an ugly America, persists. Somebody said to me, we're coming up on a big 250th celebration. I said, yeah, for a lot of people, that's going to be a shame tour. We'll be shaming and blaming America for its horrible history. And again, it's no wonder that students don't trust government. They don't like government. They don't love America, because to the extent they're being taught this kind of ugly story.
And the Zinn textbook, I did not see in your presentation that there's an effort to dislodge it from the schools. Is there? Is anyone talking about the fact this is sentimental rubbish?
Well, of course. One interesting dimension of all this is that each state selects its own textbooks. And so obviously in Texas, you're not going to find a lot of teaching of Howard Zinn. You're still going to find the more positive stories. But in my home state of California, my own daughter was studying Howard Zinn. And she came home one day and she said, Dad, I wish you were in my American history class. I was surprised because as a teenager, I didn't see very many places she wanted me involved in her life. I said, why is that? She said, I have to assume there's another version of this story, but we're not hearing it in schools. So yes, there would be some states where Zinn would not be widely used, but certainly in many, many of our states, including mine, he's very widely read, and it's one of the more widely read textbooks in America.
And just here at the end, 30 seconds, do the teachers know that it's prejudice?
Um, I think that varies, John. I think there are a number of liberal social science teachers who themselves very much believe in the Zinn narrative. Others probably think it's an alternative, but as I said, it's really taken on too much power.
The book is A Republic, If We Can Teach It, Fixing America's Civic Education Crisis, Jeffrey Sikkenga, David Davenport, What Is to Be Done? Highly recommended to the educators among you, as well as the parents. Ronald Reagan. All great change comes from the dinner table, and the dinner table is where you must correct or fill in the pieces are missing about civics and American history. Fixing America's civic education crisis. Before we get to the fix, we come to an answer that was provided, and then another answer that was provided. I presume well-meaning people who think, well, there's not enough civics, so let's make it more exciting. David, what is action civics?
John, action civics, I think if we want to take the high road, was developed as an alternative to boring civics. I think the problem that some were trying to solve with action civics was let's get the kids more involved. Let's not just have them sit in classrooms studying boring textbooks about civics and history. Let's get them out into the community to experience it. And so Action Civics says, instead of so much study in the classroom about America, let's get students out. Let's have them go to city council meetings. Let's have them work on projects in their community. Let's have them go to protests and see what they can learn about America from that. Of course, there are several problems with that. One is even in science classes, you don't go out in the field and do experiments until you've done a lot of study in the classroom and you've developed a hypothesis about how things work. And only then do you go out in the laboratory or into the field and take an experiment and then come back and study how that works. So action civics is not a very deliberate, careful study as we would find in science. A second problem is that if you're just taking action, and I think your example earlier of college protesters is a great one, if all you do is go out and protest without understanding of how the Middle East works and what the deeper problems are, then you're really not doing anything except shouting and pounding the table. And so this is part of the problem is we've got kids out there shouting and pounding the tables and getting stirred up, but they don't really have a deep understanding of even the issues. And finally, of course, it unleashes a sort of a new political force on the world. I mean, do we really want our teachers organizing kids to go out and undertake protests? I mean, is that what school is about? My sense is that it's not. So action civics, I think, sort of puts the cart before the horse. It puts action before understanding. And I don't think we do that in other fields of education. We shouldn't be doing it in civics.
Another country easier to talk about than our own, not to upset people. Just Stop Oil. The Just Stop Oil movement, for some reason, believes that spraying orange paint or orange dye on human beings is going to reverse the course of civilization so that we give up on fossil fuel that we completely depend upon for the conversation David and I are having about civics.
Right,
We
right.
depend on an enormous amount of energy, and we're going to demand more and more as we get into AGI. You want to give up your information, you're also going to give up your house, your car, and your future. But Just Stop Oil is action civics, not in this country, not yet
Right.
anyway. Maybe
No,
it's easier to see what a farce it is because it's on the other side of the Atlantic.
sure. And a more immediate example here at home is students who say we ought to stop investing in companies doing business in Israel. Well, we do live in a global economy, John. I don't know if you were aware of that, but that means we're not going to invest in McDonald's. We're not going to invest in Google. We're not going to invest in Amazon. I mean, just it's just outrageous in a global economy to assume you can pick out those stocks and undo those sort of investments. So it just doesn't reflect any real understanding of how, in this case, the economy works.
Do the teachers know this? Because we're talking about teachers who are my children's age, millennials. Are they aware that action civics is self-defeating and uninformed?
I think often the teachers in action civics are motivated by not boring their students. I think they realize that it's not easy to teach lots of subjects, including history and civics. And so this is an easy way to engage students. But as we point out in our book, there are better ways to engage students and to make the civics classroom an exciting place, which Jeff and I have seen and done. And so I think I hate to say it's laziness, but it's accepting an easy alternative to the problem of boredom.
One more detail. What is lived civics? Action civics is outside green
Right.
tech. What is lived civics?
Well, live civics is an even newer idea, and that is that especially with students who of color, students who've grown up in certain ethnic communities, that in order to teach them civics, we have to start from their experience. And they need to learn civics based on their own experience as the kind of Americans that they are. So rather than acknowledging that there's a body of knowledge or there's a body of history that we need to understand in order to understand today. I love the old quote from a British scientist, things are as they are because they were as they were. And so rather than going back to understand how we got here and then look at your own experience, Live Civic says we have to start with who you are today as a Black American, as a Chinese American, and then from that you back into some understanding of civics. It's again, it's unlikely to really improve our understanding of history and civics.
Now we
That's
come to
being charitable.
California, your state, David. As I understand it, California has chosen ethnic studies as a replacement for live civics as the same thing. How does it work?
Well, I'd say in fairness, it's sort of a new layer of education in California. We are the first state, as we are often the first state, to require ethnic studies. And there was a huge debate out here, John. It took the legislature and the state school board years to try to even get to first base on this project because, the first cut at it ignored Jewish students and ignored Asian students at the expense of other ethnics. So, what is an ethnic student and what are legitimate ethnic studies? Um, so, the notion that America seeks to be a melting pot, that America seeks to integrate all kinds of backgrounds, again, this sort of cuts in the other direction. Let's not worry about that. Let's worry about each student's identity racially and ethnically. And let's be sure we study and understand all of that. I'm not sure yet, John, whether I think the intention is that it's to be in addition to whatever other history and civics they do, but we haven't had enough experience yet, I think, to know how it really plays out in the classroom.
And so it's brand new. It's a new version of Action Civics. This
Correct.
time it's particular to the origin of some members of the class. All
Correct.
right. Each of these ideas has come to answer the missing piece, civics. And now we turn to the one that David and Jeffrey recommend. It's called a cake, a layer cake. Let us begin.
Right. Right.
Metaphor of the layer cake. How do you imagine it, David?
Well, it's easy for me to imagine, John. My dad was a baker, so I spent thousands of hours in the back of a bakery. Um, what we mean by a layer cake civics is that you start in the very earliest years, kindergarten certainly, and you begin to build an age appropriate understanding about America. And each grade, you add a new layer to the cake. In elementary school, we argue that that's where we need a big emphasis on stories. Yeah, little kids love stories, and we need to go back to telling the stories about America. Parents at the dinner table, student teachers in the classroom. What are the great stories about America? What are the great biographies? Who are the great characters that we need to understand? So elementary school, those layers are more the what of civic education, and we think telling stories is one good way to get at that. Middle school becomes more about the how. Those are the layers you begin. How does the government address some of these things today? And then by high school, we should be well beyond that and able to get into the why. Why do you care about America? Why do we have checks and balances? Why do we have a Supreme Court that has the powers that it has? And so that's the layer cake that we think schools need to build, kindergarten right on through 12, and frankly, college as well.
You previously published a book, Equality of Opportunity, with your friend and colleague, the late Gordon Lloyd. In there, there's great attention to one president more than any other, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Right.
What is a way to teach the young, maybe elementary school, but certainly middle school and high school, about the significance of FDR, where he came from, his polio, his conduct, how he died in office, even though he knew he was in poor health? How do we teach them to engage them, David?
I have two thoughts on that, John. First of all, by emphasizing the teaching of reading skills today, which is what schools are challenged to do, they no longer feel the need to read biographies of people like Martin Luther King, Franklin Roosevelt, very important people in the development of our history and where we are today. Um, we use the line in the book borrowed from E.D. Hirsch. The teachers feel they can teach skills as well from the book Tyler Makes Pancakes as they can a biography of Abraham Lincoln. So we've given up reading those biographies, and you can teach reading skills from those biographies just as well. And you are at the same time giving students some content knowledge. The second thing I would say is what Jeff and I really advocate is teaching American history and civics through primary documents. And I've actually taught through the Ashbrook Center, which Jeff heads. I've taught teachers how to teach Herbert Hoover and Franklin Roosevelt and the Great Depression and the New Deal by reading Roosevelt speeches, Hoover speeches, bills that were passed in the first 100 days of Roosevelt's New Deal, Supreme Court decisions about the New Deal, going back in history and reading and engaging the debates of the time. We think that's maybe the best way to be teaching history and civics in the classroom. Primary documents, recreating the debates and issues of the day, taking off our 21st century lenses as we travel back and understanding issues in their own time and context.
And
That we think is the gold standard.
a new idea to me, David, you introduced in our conversation. Civics Bees. What is that?
That's something brand new, John, that came up since we wrote our book, and I'm really excited about it. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation and the Daniels Fund in Denver has started promoting Civics Bees around the country, especially for junior high kids. And they're just getting really excited about it. Like spelling bees, they learn civics and have contests all over the country about who has done the best job of learning civics. It's something that's outside the classroom. It's an extracurricular activity. And like debate and band and sports, often kids get excited and engaged in those things beyond what they can do in the classroom. And so I think it's a great idea.
Yes, I confessed to David when it first came up that beyond Martha Washington and Molly Pitcher, I'd be stuck on the revolutionary names of women who participated in the success. So I would be challenged by a Civics Bees. I'm sure I'd have to do
I
prep.
think I think we could bring you up to speed, John. I think you show promise, if not actual yet information and knowledge.
Thank you, Professor. We're going to turn now to what is to be done for the state legislatures and for the federal government, two sources of money and also disorder. A Republic, if we can teach it, is the new book, Fixing America's Civic Education Crisis. Right to you, Mr. and Ms. Principal, right to you, because you can change the direction of civics right away. It's not difficult, but there's money. So let us go to, if we have a system of federalism, state governments. I was pleased to see that 4 states that I wouldn't have guessed already have civics in the middle school where it belongs, right there.
Right.
Sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth. I think my memory is that I had to memorize explorers in America by the sixth grade, maybe even the fifth grade. Can you recall when you first learned those names, David?
No, I can't. But John, what I do recall is I loved these books that existed in my childhood called "You Were There" or "We Were There." So you were there at the Panama Canal. You were there on Paul Revere's ride, and this had a way of sort of not only drawing me into the story of America, which is in itself great, but it did familiarize me with the explorers and the great stories.
Yes, Cortez and El Dorado. Okay, we come now to what is a state's responsibility. 4 states I've mentioned. There, you can't guess them. Florida, okay. Florida is very aggressive these days, but New
Right,
Jersey, Alabama, and Indiana, not Massachusetts, where the revolution took place, not
right.
Pennsylvania, where the Civil War took place. Maybe they'll catch up, but what do these 4 states do for civics? How do they help?
Well, the best practices, let me back up and say that the state legislatures, in addition to teachers, are maybe the two most important actors in making significant progress. What state legislatures can and should do is decide how much civics is to be taught and in what grades. And this is where they need to roll up their sleeves and get to work. And so we need standards, and states are moving in this direction. So it's not altogether a bad story, but we need standards for every grade level in every state. So if I'm in the California legislature, I need to be making sure that we're teaching civics in K through 8, or K through 6 in elementary school. I want to accomplish this in kindergarten. I want to accomplish that by first grade. And so they decide how many hours of civics should be taught and what subjects should be taught as we move up the scale. State legislatures, state boards of education, that's their primary job. And as you say, some are beginning to step up and do that. And the Fordham Institute, by the way, has done a wonderful study of state standards in this field. And it's called out the good and the bad states that need to be getting more done. So we need a lot more attention there.
And they have the money. I see that they're keen on policy. In other words, thou shalt not, or,
Right.
but backing it up with money. Incentives for the teachers. Is that impossible to do?
No,
If you
no,
achieve this, we'll
it's
give
very
you that.
possible. Unfortunately, the state legislatures have gotten caught up in what we call a whack-a-mole sort of thing, where Bad ideas do admittedly pop up in education. The 1619 Project, lived civics, these things pop up. And so state legislatures have been busily trying to beat these down, passing laws saying you can't teach this, you can't teach that. Well, we could go on and on about whether that's the best strategy to eradicate weeds is just to stand there, popping them all. What we think they should be more about is making sure that good civics is taught in the right amounts at the right grades and the right times. So we'd much rather see them doing their primary job than passing all these individual bills about you must not teach this, you must not teach that.
Federal government. Now, David, I winced when I read the federal government headline because I thought when you invite Washington in, everything falls apart. So it's just they've got too much money and they get to have oversight when they participate in the funding. So what do you recommend for the federal government? Can they do hands off by providing cash and walking away?
We're frankly suspicious of it, as you are, John. Our fear is that the federal government can't support civics financially without attaching strings and getting into how we teach civics, which needs to be left to the states and to the teachers. Historically, the federal government used to provide some financial support to teacher education. And frankly, this is greatly needed. One part of the problem is that our teachers themselves do not know history and civics well. They're just a
Right.
few pages ahead in the textbook of the students. Our schools of education teach how to teach, but they don't teach content, what to teach. So you have teachers going out into these fields who really don't know history and civics themselves. So our preference is that the federal government limit itself to cheerleading and saying how important and valuable civics is, like Ronald Reagan did. But if they have to spend money on it, then our preference is that they spend it for teacher education and incentives and improvements.
A republic, if we can teach it, fixing America's civic education crisis. Jeffrey Sikkenga, David Davenport. I'm John Batchelor.